My name is Delaney Carter. I will never forget the moment the truck sped through the intersection, the screech of brakes tearing through the air, and then my whole world exploded in a blinding shock. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, my ribs sharp with pain, breath broken. The husband I once trusted looked at me like a broken object and coldly said, "I can't stand a useless wife anymore." Those words hurt more than the crash itself. But what he didn't know was that only a few days later, my life would turn with a secret worth $100 million. If you've ever been belittled by the person closest to you, how would you react? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe to keep following the next part of the story, where the truth comes to light and I am forced to choose a path for myself. After the accident, lying in the hospital listening to Daniel's cruel words, memories of the road I had walked came rushing back like a slow film. Perhaps to understand why I could hold my head up after everything, we need to go back to the day I laid the first bricks for my own life. The house on Beacon Hill, with its red brick walls and federal-style windows, was not a gift I was handed. It was the result of years of eating tuna sandwiches and cheap coffee, working 2 or 3 jobs at once, saving every penny. I remember standing in the supermarket debating whether I should buy another pack of cheese, because that money could go into my savings at the end of the month. When I signed the contract to buy the house, I was only 29. The broker stared at me like he couldn't believe a young woman alone could put down a deposit earned with her own sweat. I smiled, took the keys, and breathed deeply, knowing I had claimed a piece of the world for myself. I also remember the first night in that house. The walls still damp with plaster, the old wood floors creaking, and I spread a thin blanket in the middle of the living room, using my backpack as a pillow. Outside, the yellow gas lamps cast shadows of climbing vines across the brick wall, and I whispered, "I did it." That feeling could never be taken from me, no matter how many times Daniel tried to erase my effort later on. Work was the same. I founded Whitaker Wren, a small tech company specializing in data infrastructure. At first, it was only 4 of us crammed into a tiny rented room, but we worked day and night. I had signed contracts while running a 102 fever, driven 200 miles just to meet a potential client, and given up vacations to have enough funds to pay my employees. Those years taught me that persistence has no fireworks. It's endless days of typing at a keyboard in silence. Then the merger and acquisition came like a storm. A larger corporation bought into the company, and I became CEO with thousands of employees in Boston and New York. People called me the founder. The press wrote flattering lines. But I knew well, being CEO meant waking up at 4 a.m. to review payroll, signing contracts hundreds of pages long at midnight, and worrying about every family depending on my company. I lived by that rhythm, and deep inside it was the music I loved most. Daniel appeared when I had already found some success. He walked into my life in a tailored suit, a knowing smile, a vintage bicycle propped in the hallway like artwork. He often joked that he brought modern energy to my old house. At first, I found the contrast amusing. He was calm, charming, knew how to make me feel chosen. I thought, maybe this was the man who could share both the light and the dark of life with me. But slowly I realized Daniel had a habit, belittling me to raise himself up. When friends asked about my work, he would often laugh and say briefly, "She does some consulting here and there, mostly stays at home." I sat beside him, sometimes trying to explain that I ran a whole company, that I had gone through a deal worth hundreds of millions. But he would brush it off or change the subject. Once when I pressed him, Daniel shrugged, "Titles don't mean anything. Truly talented people don't need to brag." Partly from exhaustion, partly from believing keeping the peace mattered more. But deep down I knew he was twisting the truth, shrinking my accomplishments. And my silence, unintentionally, let him do it again and again. I still remember a dinner at a small restaurant on Charles Street. An old friend of mine, also an investor, started asking about my company, about expansion plans. Daniel cut in, "She's good with numbers, that's all. The big stuff is handled by the team." I forced a smile, sipped my wine. In that moment, I caught the surprised look in my friend's eyes, and I understood. The image Daniel painted of me out there was nothing like reality. When I confronted him later, saying I wanted respect, Daniel sighed, "You're always too sensitive. I just want to keep things light." He kissed my forehead as if that was enough to erase everything. But inside, a crack had formed. The truth is, I wasn't unfamiliar with being underestimated. I grew up in an ordinary suburban family where money was always a strain. My parents fought about utility bills and I started working part-time at 15. The only person who truly saw potential in me was Aunt Margaret, a single woman living in Manhattan. When I was 12, she took me for a walk in Central Park and said, "Delaney, you have to learn to understand money. Don't let it tell you who you are. You tell money who it serves." Those words carved themselves into me. Aunt Margaret never had children, but she gave me books, museum trips, and most importantly, an example of independence. I thought of her often every time Daniel diminished me. The house on Beacon Hill, the company I built, they were proof I had walked on my own. But in my husband's eyes, I was a woman needing his patronage. I tried to convince myself he loved me in his own way, that men sometimes only wanted to feel stronger. But deep down, I knew real love doesn't require diminishing each other. Every night, walking through the hallway with the gaslight shadows on the wall, I often asked myself, why did I accept silence? Maybe because I had grown so used to carrying the weight alone, I no longer had the strength to argue. And then the accident happened. When Daniel spoke those cruel words at my hospital bed, I knew this wasn't a careless slip. It was his true face finally revealed. But what he didn't know was that my life still held a card he never saw coming. The phone rang on a gray morning in Boston. Still sore from the bruises after the crash, unable to stay out of bed for long, I saw the name on the screen. Richard Hale, my family's lawyer in New York, and my heart clenched. Richard was not the kind of man to call directly unless it was important. His voice was deep and deliberate, each word weighed before it fell. "Delaney," he said, "I'm very sorry to inform you of this. Your Aunt Margaret passed away 2 weeks ago in Manhattan. And the probate process moved faster than expected. Today, I am obligated to make it official. She left her entire estate in a trust worth about $100 million, and you are the sole beneficiary." Those staggering numbers didn't match my shallow breaths, didn't match the crumpled white pillow beneath my cheek. I pressed my hand to my chest, wondering if I had misheard. But Richard went on, steady as someone who had seen families shatter over money before. "The trust can be opened immediately if you sign the documents. I'll send an email with all the details. But Delaney, I want to emphasize something. Your aunt prepared this for a very long time. In her will, she wrote that you were the one who truly understood the lesson she repeated again and again. Money must serve people, not the other way around." I bit my lip, her image flashing vividly before me. The Upper East Side apartment with its burgundy velvet sofa, bookshelves stacked with first editions, and her sharp laugh when she called me her stubborn Whittaker girl. I remembered the afternoon when I was 12, her hand holding mine as we walked through Central Park, showing me how the wealthy wasting money were no different from the poor if they let it define them. "Delaney," she had said, "one day you will face a choice. Either let money lead you or learn to make money obey you." That memory made me burst into tears. I turned my face away to hide the tears, but in the empty room, there was no one to hide from. I whispered into the receiver, "Thank you, Richard. Thank you for calling. I'll need a few days." Richard spoke softly, "I understand. Take your rest. When you're ready, I'll fly to Boston. No rush." After hanging up, I lay still for a long time. The number 100 million hovered in the air, like a bird refusing to land. It was both safety and burden, and I didn't yet know how I would walk forward on legs not fully healed. The first person I thought of, strangely enough, was Daniel. Not because I wanted to share the joy, but because I knew exactly how he would react. If he heard the news, he would immediately start calculating, jotting down the upgrades he wanted, from the kitchen to the Cape Cod vacation house he had always dreamed of. He would say things like, "See? Finally luck has come. Now we can live the way we deserve." With Daniel, we had never truly meant us. It always leaned toward him. I had planned to keep the secret at least until the weekend. I pictured a quiet morning, sunlight pouring through the window, me brewing hot coffee, placing 2 mugs on the table. I would tell him about Aunt Margaret's inheritance, about how now we could fix the roof, replace all the windows, even help his sister in Chicago pay off her graduate school debt. I wanted to use that moment to prove our future could still be rebuilt with kindness. But I never got the chance. 2 days later, the accident struck. The piercing screech of brakes, glass shattering like hail, and my body thrown violently. When I woke up in the hospital, my neck stiff, my shoulder in a cast, my chest aching so badly that even breathing was torture. At that moment, instead of hearing comfort, I was met with Daniel's cold words. Words that hurt no less than the impact on the road. When Daniel walked into the hospital room for the first time after the crash, I almost told him about the enormous money. I imagined his face lighting up, and in that glow I might see a new spark of hope in our marriage. But everything collapsed when he frowned, standing far from the bed as if afraid of catching a disease, and bluntly asked, "Did you sign any papers? Did the hospital add extra charges? I don't want surprises with money." From deep inside, I knew that if I revealed the inheritance now, that money would become a double-edged sword. It would turn me into a walking wallet in my husband's eyes. That night, I opened Richard's email. On the screen was a document dozens of pages long. Trust structures, withdrawal terms, investment portfolios. I read but remembered none of it, only feeling like I was holding a map leading to a world Daniel had no idea existed. In the dark, I whispered to myself, I have to wait. I have to stand firm first. I have to find the right moment to speak, not for him but for myself. But life rarely gives us time to prepare. What I had planned to keep until the weekend was swept away by my husband's cruelty, by his scornful gaze, and by the very crash that nearly killed me. I closed my eyes, picturing Aunt Margaret's face as if asking her for a bit of strength. And in my restless dream I heard her laugh, the same laugh that once echoed in her New York apartment. "Delaney, remember this. Money does not define you. You will be the one to define your own life." The hospital door creaked open, hinges crying faintly, and Daniel walked in. He didn't bring flowers, nor the worried look a husband usually carries after his wife has survived a crash. He shoved both hands in his pockets, stood at the end of the bed, his eyes scanning me as if checking whether a broken object could still be used. "You look awful," he said, his voice so cold it made me shiver. I forced a weak smile, trying to believe it was only an awkward comment. But then he added, "I can't stand a useless wife lying in bed. I need a woman who knows how to bring value, not be a burden." I heard the steady beeps of the heart monitor beside me, but in my head they became pounding hammers. I tried to open my mouth, but my throat was dry. Everything flashed back to our wedding day, when he had once promised to stand by me through anything. That vow now dissolved into a bitter joke. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling, "do you know, Aunt Margaret has passed away. She left me an inheritance, larger than anything you could imagine." He frowned, his lips curling into a mocking smile. "You're exaggerating again. Always so dramatic. If you really had money, we wouldn't be living like this. Stop daydreaming, Delaney." Those words struck me like a second collision, crueler than the truck on the road. I had been injured in body, and now he crushed my spirit too. I turned my face away, eyes brimming. He stepped closer, leaned in, his voice low but hard as steel. "I don't have patience, Delaney. I can't carry a wife who only lies there and dreams." I clenched the bedsheet, feeling cornered against an invisible wall. I asked, my voice nearly breaking, "What about all the years I worked through, nights without eating, without sleeping, to keep this household standing? The nights I corrected every contract, the days I scrambled to make payroll for employees? In your eyes, all of that means nothing." Daniel shrugged, lifting his head toward the ceiling as if bored. "All I ever saw was you glued to a laptop. All vague nonsense. If you were really that good, why aren't we as rich as others?" Heat surged to my face. I wasn't someone who cried easily, but in that moment the tears came uninvited. They weren't from weakness but from the agony of being denied, not my effort but my existence. In that instant I saw Penelope, the nurse on duty, quietly enter to check the form machine. She glanced at me, caught the blur of tears in my eyes, then turned to look at Daniel. She said nothing, but her furrowed brow spoke for me. Did he really say that? Daniel didn't notice. He adjusted his tie as if he had finished his task, then turned toward the door. "I've got a client meeting in Back Bay. When you're done signing the hospital papers, let me know. I can't stay here any longer." The door closed behind him, leaving the faint trail of cedarwood cologne. A scent that once made me feel safe now suffocated me. Penelope stepped closer, resting her hand lightly on the bed rail. Her voice was quiet, yet it echoed inside me like a bell. "You know, sometimes people are lucky to survive an accident, but unlucky in who they love. Those two things aren't contradictions." In her calm eyes I saw the bare truth. I had survived the crash on the street, but I wasn't sure I could survive this marriage any longer. I swallowed hard, clutching the bedsheet as if it were the last thread to hold on to. Every word Daniel had thrown at me replayed in my head, but this time they no longer pierced me. They became evidence. Evidence that my marriage had fractured beyond repair. The hospital door swung open, and this time Daniel wasn't alone. Beside him was a young woman, tall, delicate features, dark hair neatly tied back. A slender diamond ring on her left hand caught the fluorescent light. Daniel entered with a smug smile, his eyes sweeping over me as if ready to deliver a fatal blow. He spoke slowly, each word dropping heavy into the air. "Delaney, I think you should meet my new wife. This is Sophie." The air in the room froze. I felt my breath catch in my chest. The words "new wife" drilled into my ears, making my physical wounds suddenly feel small compared to this blow to my soul. Sophie at first kept a polite composure, nodding slightly like a stranger stepping into a place she didn't belong. But then she lifted her gaze, looked straight at me. Her eyes froze, widened, filled with shock. Her mouth fell open, her trembling hand lifted to cover her face. "Oh my God," Sophie stammered, her voice almost a whisper but loud enough for the whole room to hear. This is my Sio." Daniel stiffened. The confident smirk vanished, replaced by a look of awkwardness I had never seen. He forced a laugh, quickly cutting in. "You're mistaken, Sophie. Delaney only does some side tasks. She's not who you think she is." But Sophie shook her head hard, strands of hair falling loose from the force of it. "No. I remember very clearly. We met after the meeting in the Boston office, Ms. Carter. You were the one on the stage talking about the new product strategy about the New York team. I remember every word you said." I stayed silent, only looking at Daniel. My eyes were like a mirror reflecting the raw truth he could no longer hide. Daniel gave a harsh laugh, his tone sharper as if anger could drown out logic. "Sophie, you must be confused. Do you know how many women are in the company? Delaney isn't the CEO. You've been fooled by the way she exaggerates herself." Sophie turned, and in her eyes there was no confusion anymore, but disappointment mixed with fear. She stepped back, keeping distance from Daniel as if she had touched something filthy. "I'm not mistaken. I receive weekly emails directly from her. The name Delaney Carter is clearly printed on every company notice. Do you think I don't know who I work for?" I tilted my head, my voice calm but edged with bitterness. "You never came to any of my company's events, Daniel. You never listened when I tried to finish a sentence about work. To you, I was always the woman in the kitchen wearing the label wife. So it's no surprise you don't know who I am." Sophie swallowed hard, her face a mix of confusion and respect. Clearly, she had no idea the man beside her had hidden such a massive truth. "Delaney," she said, her voice shaking. I didn't know anything. I had no idea that Daniel had ever been married. I'm sorry, truly sorry." Daniel barked. "Shut up. This isn't your business." But Sophie stepped back again, her shoulders trembling. My body weak but my heart suddenly sharper than ever. I realized the so-called family Daniel had built was nothing but a stage play. And now, as the curtain fell, the truth left him nowhere to hide. A knock echoed sharply, breaking the heavy tension in the sterile white hospital room. The door opened and Richard stepped in with his worn brown leather briefcase, his solemn face carrying the weight of an irreversible moment. He nodded, his eyes glancing past Daniel and Sophie before settling on me. His voice was steady. "Delaney, I've brought the trust documents. If you'd like, we can finalize everything right here. Once signed, the entire amount will officially be under your name." I could hear my heartbeat clearly through the monitor beside me. Daniel raised his brows, forcing a thin laugh. "What papers? Don't tell me this is another one of your jokes, Delaney." I extended my left hand, still trembling under its bandage, toward Richard. He opened the briefcase, pulled out a thick file and placed it neatly on the bedside table. A blue fountain pen rested on the final page where bold letters spelled out, "Delaney Margaret Carter." I looked at my name. The middle name, Margaret, felt like a thread tying me back to my aunt, the woman who had trusted me and left her entire legacy in my hands. The image of her in that New York apartment, the red velvet sofa, the bright eyes and tilted smile, appeared vividly before me. With my good hand I gripped the pen. The nib touched the paper and stroke by stroke my signature appeared, shaking but resolute. Richard gathered the papers, his voice firm. From this moment forward, Delaney, the entire value of the trust belongs to you. The bank has been notified and will await your direct orders. Daniel forced a crooked smile, then quickly stepped closer to the bed, his voice suddenly syrupy, fake sweetness dripping. See? Everything will be fine now. We can start over. With this money, you and I, we can live the life we deserve. I looked straight into his eyes, seeing for the first time the shamelessness without disguise. My words came slowly, not loud but unshakable. You already have a new wife. And I also have a new life. Daniel froze, his face twisting, both shocked and afraid. He stammered, Delaney, what are you saying? Don't act on emotion. You know, I only went a little too far. You are my wife, my family. You can't. Family. I laughed bitterly. A man who brings his new wife to introduce to his old wife in a hospital. That's what you call family? Oh, Daniel. That's raw betrayal. Sophie now stood to the side, her face pale. Her eyes wide, stunned, as if everything around her had collapsed. She stepped back, then with newfound courage moved forward one step, her voice shaky but clear. You lied to me, Daniel. You told me you were divorced. You never once told me about Delaney. Now I see. I was nothing but a shadow in your game. Daniel turned toward her, trying desperately. Sophie, you have to understand this isn't what you think. But Sophie cut him off, tears brimming yet her gaze unwavering. No, I understand all too well now. This woman is my CEO, the leader I respect. You didn't only betray her, you betrayed me too. I cannot stand by a man like that. In that moment, I saw her as the third person in my marriage, but as another woman Daniel had deceived. I gave her a small nod as if to say I understood, that she needn't carry any guilt. Sophie turned toward the door, her voice breaking yet firm. I choose to stand with the truth. And the truth has never stood beside you, Daniel. His hands clenching and unclenching, his eyes darting from me to Richard, then to the door Sophie had walked through. In the pale hospital light, I saw him clearly for what he was. A defeated man, stripped of power with nothing left to grasp. I sank back against the pillow, the pain in my shoulder still throbbing, but inside a strange strength was rising. I had signed those papers, spoken words that could never be unsaid. More importantly, I had cut the cord that bound me for so long. The next day, when Richard returned to the hospital with another stack of documents, I knew it was time to make a decision. I wanted to imprison myself in a marriage full of fractures. My hands still trembled from painkillers, but inside I had never been clearer. I would divorce Daniel. Richard opened the leather case, placing a thick stack on the table. Delaney, he said calmly, you hold a major advantage. The prenuptial agreement you signed with Daniel from the beginning. I must commend you, it was wise. It protects all your separate assets, including the Beacon Hill house and your company shares. I remembered the day Daniel had scowled when signing it. He had grumbled that it was unromantic, that I didn't trust him. I smiled and replied, if our love is strong enough, a piece of paper will never be a problem. And now, the very paper he dismissed as cold was the solid wall keeping him from touching anything that belonged to me. When the divorce papers were filed in court, Daniel reacted instantly. He confronted me in the hospital hallway, his face tight, his eyes bloodshot. Delaney, you can't do this to me. We can still fix. I cut him off. You ended it yourself, Daniel. Don't forget you brought Sophie to the hospital, called her your new wife. I don't need to explain any further. He fell silent but still tried to cling. That was only a misunderstanding. I hadn't had the chance to tell you the divorce papers were still pending. No, Daniel. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was bigamy, a crime. You married Sophie while you were still legally my husband. And you know exactly what that means. Daniel's face went pale. He swallowed hard, unable to speak. Richard stepped forward, placing another file on the small table in the hallway. We have already filed a complaint with the court. This isn't a divorce matter, Mr. Brooks. This is a crime. I saw Daniel tremble as if his whole world was collapsing around him. He had always thought of himself as the one in control, the one with the right to leave me. But now he was the one branded a criminal, abandoned. The trial took place 2 months later, inside a dark wooden courtroom in downtown Boston. I sat at the plaintiff's bench, my shoulders still aching but my head held high. Richard sat beside me, giving a discreet nod of reassurance. Daniel entered in a wrinkled suit, his stride stripped of pride. Beside him wasn't Sophie, she had left him the day at the hospital, but a nervous young lawyer flipping anxiously through paperwork. The judge read the charges, his voice echoing through the room. Defendant, Mr. Daniel Brooks, you are charged with the crime of bigamy, marrying another woman while your legal marriage to Mrs. Delaney Carter was still in effect. The room buzzed with murmurs. Daniel flushed red, glancing around as if searching for an escape. His lawyer rose quickly, speaking in haste. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding of administrative procedure. My client believed his marriage had ended when the divorce petition was filed. Richard immediately countered, his voice firm. No divorce petition was filed before the wedding ceremony with Miss Sophie Marlowe. All documents confirm that the marriage between Mr. Brooks and Mrs. Carter was still legally binding. This cannot be called a mistake. I remained motionless while emotion rose inside me. Daniel was finally facing the consequences of his own contempt and deceit. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, Your Honor, I am not seeking revenge. I only want the truth to be acknowledged. I lived for years with a man who never respected my work or my dignity. Now everyone can see, he made himself a criminal without me having to prove a thing. Daniel lowered his head, his hands gripping the edge of the table. At last, the judge declared, my divorce petition was approved immediately under the terms of the prenuptial agreement. All of my assets, including the house on Beacon Hill, Whitaker Ryn, and the Margaret Trust, were fully protected. Daniel, on the other hand, not only lost everything but would also face the criminal charge of bigamy from his own actions. Richard leaned closer, whispering, You've done it, Delaney. This isn't a legal victory. It's proof you are no longer bound by what he imposed on you. On my way out of court, I caught sight of Daniel standing frozen on the courthouse steps, his eyes vacant. The man who once strutted in tailored suits, claiming to bring modern energy into my old house, was now reduced to a hollow shadow. I didn't stop. The car door shut and outside the city of Boston glowed in the late autumn sun. A new chapter was waiting. In the days after the trial, I returned to Beacon Hill with a feeling both strange and familiar. The old house I had nearly broken myself to afford now felt like a silent friend waiting patiently for me to come home. The red brick walls still stood stubborn and steady like the way I had survived. But inside, everything needed to be revived. I started by calling workers to repair the roof and replace the drafty old windows that had let in winters for too many years. When the truckload of materials pulled up, neighbors slowed to peek and I smiled, feeling lighter. This house deserved to breathe in new light just as I deserved a fresh start. On the day the crew tore apart the old kitchen, I watching as peeling cabinet doors and faded drawers were hauled out. A pang of sadness flickered, but excitement quickly followed. I had once imagined a bright kitchen with a long dining table, a place for both contracts and lemon tarts. Now it was becoming real. When the design was done, I chose white shaker cabinets, a wide farmhouse sink and a quartz countertop. I no longer had to count every dollar. But more important than the money was the warmth I wanted in that kitchen. Not to show off but to feel life in every meal. One afternoon, I held the document certifying that my mortgage was paid off in full. My fingers trembled on the cold printed words, but my heart overflowed. I pressed my hand against the wooden stair rail, remembering the nights I had sat there, afraid I couldn't keep the house. Now it was wholly mine. With Aunt Margaret's trust, I didn't want to stop at renovations or purchases. I decided to use part of it to give back to those who had walked the hard road with me. At a full company meeting, I stepped onto the stage, lights shining, and looked out at familiar faces. Engineers, designers, staff who had believed in me even when the company was a cramped rental office. You stood with me through the hardest years. Now it's my turn to do right. Starting today, each of you will receive a special bonus from a fund I've established. This isn't money, it's a thank you for your loyalty and trust. Applause roared. I saw some hugging, some wiping away tears. In that moment, I knew the inheritance wasn't only a number, it was a chance to rewrite many stories. I didn't stop there. I created a fund to support women entrepreneurs, especially those underestimated or denied opportunity. I remembered too clearly knocking on dozens of bank doors and only hearing rejection. I wanted other women never to endure that humiliation. I also sent part of the money to a shelter for women and children in South Boston. On my first visit, I saw little faces hiding behind their mothers, eyes a mix of fear and hope. I held the manager's hand and said, "I want to make sure no one here shivers through winter. I want these children to have coats, beds, and the feeling of safety." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "You've given us more than money, you've given us proof someone still cares." One early spring morning, with sunlight filtering through my newly installed windows, I received an email from Sophie. Her message was brief: "I'd like to meet if you're willing. I have a lot I need to say." Once I thought I'd never want to see her again. But I remembered her shaken eyes in the hospital when the truth broke open. She too had been caught in Daniel's web. I replied, "Tomorrow, the cafe on Charles Street. 10 a.m." The next day Sophie arrived, slender in a beige coat, carrying a blank notebook, her eyes red. When she saw me, she hesitated. "I don't know where to start. I'm sorry. I truly didn't know he was still your husband." "I believe you, Sophie. He deceived us both. But we're not enemies. We're women who've both been hurt." Sophie bit her lip, then suddenly cried. She confessed Daniel had promised her a future, told her I had left him, that she was the one who truly understood him. "Tao, I see," Sophie whispered. Those were only words he needed to get what he wanted. I handed her a tissue. Between us there was no rivalry anymore, only the shared understanding of women rising after a fall. When we parted, Sophie gripped my hand. "Thank you for not seeing me as the enemy. I'll start over, and this time I won't let anyone define my life for me." So will I. The house on Beacon Hill now glowed with a new kitchen, new windows, and new air. But more importantly, my heart had been rebuilt. And the most beautiful part was that I wasn't only rebuilding for myself. I was opening doors for others. My employees, the women at the shelter, even Sophie, we were all beginning again from old wounds but with new strength. That evening, the new kitchen at Beacon Hill shone under warm yellow lights. The scent of fresh wood mixed with the lemon tart Nora had brought from her favorite Charles Street bakery. Richard arrived too, carrying a bottle of red wine, aged long enough that, as he said, every drop tastes of patience. We sat around the newly built shaker table, its surface smooth and warm. As glasses filled, Richard raised his eyes glinting behind silver frames. "To a house that stands firm," he said. "To a woman who knows how to protect what is rightfully hers." Nora smiled, clinking glasses with me. "And to friendship without condition. No matter how many millions are in your account, true friends can't be bought." I laughed, my throat warming. "I've learned this. Some things we hold with contracts, some with signatures, but some only with trust." The air around the table was light, laughter spilling, but deep down I heard Aunt Margaret's whisper, "Understand money so it doesn't define you." Her words glowed like a small lamp, guiding me through the days I thought I would break. I turned to Richard, asking softly, "Do you think Aunt Margaret knew all this would happen? That she left her legacy not only to give me assets, but to give me the chance to choose my own life?" He smiled, eyes deep. "I believe she knew. The wise don't only leave wealth, they leave direction. And she trusted you enough to pass that on." Nora squeezed my hand. "Whatever she thought, Delaney, you've proven it. You chose to move forward, not let yourself be buried under cruelty." Outside the window, Boston was unusually quiet that night. I imagined Aunt Margaret's silhouette at her Manhattan apartment window, lamplight falling over bookshelves heavy with knowledge. Perhaps somewhere she was smiling. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the new glass. The first rays landed on the shaker table, sparkling on glasses still wet with condensation. I pressed my palm against the wood, feeling its warmth. Not the warmth of heat, but of life, of beginnings, of my own dawn. In that moment I thought of nothing about Daniel, the trial, or the wounds. All of it had receded. What remained was myself, this kitchen and light. I told myself quietly, I don't need Daniel to validate my worth. I've chosen my own life. Nora came down the stairs, hair hastily tied, a cup of coffee in hand. She looked at me and smiled. "You look like someone who's found a missing piece." I answered, voice as light as breath. "Not found again, found for the first time." Richard arrived after, carrying a fresh folder needing my signature. He placed it on the table but didn't rush me. "Whenever you're ready. No one is pushing. This is your journey." I looked at them, two friends who had held me up when everything fell apart. Gratitude filled me. Without those hands reaching at the right time, perhaps I wouldn't be seeing this dawn. Morning light spilled across the new dining table across our faces. In that moment, I knew I had stepped out of the shadows, no longer needing anyone to define my worth. This life, finally, was mine to choose. As I sat in that new kitchen, sunlight on the warm table, I thought, maybe each of us will one day face the choice. Let others define our value or bravely decide our own path. I chose the latter, and that's why I'm here telling this story. What about you? If you were in my place, would you suffer in silence or rise and claim your life? I truly want to hear your thoughts and experiences. Share them in the comments so we can talk together. And if this story spoke to you, don't forget to like and subscribe, so you don't miss the next stories about family, love, and choices that can change a life. Because who knows, within those stories you may find a piece of yourself.